Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. I'm Kevin Gosztola, joined by my co-host, Rania Khalek. Hey, Rania, how are you
Hey,
doing?
Kevin. I'm good.
Oh,
How are you?
let me do the thing where I put you on the
Huh.
same level so we can have the hosts. And then our wonderful guest at the bottom of the screen there, if you are watching, is Zoe Alexandra coming back to the show. She's with People's Dispatch. She's a globetrotter. She goes around and covers Latin America and other issues, international issues, solidarity movements as well. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
And we don't want to waste any time. The first thing I was interested in having you on to discuss is if you could break down and maybe give us some understanding of what's going on in Guatemala. I know People's Dispatch has been tracking that. You and VJ Prashad with your fine podcast, Give the People What They Want, which people can hear every week. But this is some of the coverage that you did. Guatemala heads to runoff elections amid record levels of abstention. This is the New York Times. So this is what people are seeing in the prestige press or the American press. The insurgent party is now going to be allowed to stay on Guatemala's ballot. The election agency has said so. But then frighteningly, we have the what I consider to be a colonialist fixture in the media landscape globally, The Economist, saying that Guatemala's election has produced a pleasant surprise. They like this candidate that is emerging. They call them a reformist. If you could speak to what we're seeing with Guatemala's elections, I think that would be really appreciated.
Definitely. Well, it's a complicated scenario, and I think I can quickly go over the latest updates, which are quite shocking, and then maybe give a little bit of context for people to understand. Yesterday, actually, Wednesday was a tense day because the country's Supreme Electoral Tribunal confirmed the results of the June 25th presidential general elections. Specifically the presidential race, because those results had been suspended following different complaints lodged by other parties in Guatemala. But the same day that these results were confirmed, which put Sandra Torres of the National Union of Hope Party in first place. Again, there's going to be a second round held between these two candidates, Sandra Torres and Bernardo Arevalo, who's from the Semilla movement. So the same day that it was confirmed that these two candidates would go to the runoff elections on August 20th, a different court in Guatemala, the Constitutional Court, ruled that the legal representative of, or the legal status of the Semilla party, which is Arevalo's party, would be suspended. So a bit of crisis in a sense, because they're essentially saying, one court is saying that these two candidates are going to run off elections, and then another court is saying that they no longer have legal status. And this move has completely kind of upset a large part of the population that not only voted for the Semilla party, but also sees this as an attack to democracy in the country. It's a developing situation. People are on the streets right now protesting the court. And it's important to contextualize this decision, this move, not only to talk about kind of the candidacy of Arevalo and what he represents. I mean, as you said, he's kind of a reformist, middle of the road, slightly progressive leaning. But this would be a big shift for Guatemala for many reasons. But, even before getting to that, these elections have been really shrouded with irregularities. There's been many different moments. This last attack on democracy is not the first in these electoral process. Since the beginning of the year, when campaigns were ongoing, when people were registering their candidacies, already the courts were kind of utilizing their power to essentially decide who would be able to even contest in these elections. There were several tickets, not only from more left and progressive forces, but even forces from the center and maybe even leaning towards the right wing that whose candidacies were disqualified by the court, and were not even allowed to contest the elections. One of these was pretty well known. It was the Movement for the Liberation of People with the candidate Delma Carrera, Her party had been growing in strength. It's a grassroots peasant movement. Their candidacy was disqualified. This was seen as a serious setback in terms of guaranteeing people's rights to even participate in the democratic process. So all that to say is that when these elections even take place, it's already in a situation where there's been, disqualifications, where there's been a lot of confusion, where people are not really feeling fully confident about this electoral process. And of course, the broader context of Guatemalan politics in general is that the elite parties, this is a country with a majority indigenous population, but if you look at really who's even participating in the elections, it's a lot of the small, very small part of the population, an elite white ruling class that essentially has been in power for many years, trying to use the state's funds as its own personal coffers. So many different corruption scandals that have been investigated against these members of these ruling parties. The corruption investigation, which had been gone underway in partnership with the United Nations, this was dismantled. This was dismantled by Jimmy Morales, who was a former president. So it's a situation where there's been a lot of undermining of the democratic process in Guatemala, a situation where the ruling class has been in power for many years, has engaged in serious acts of corruption, and where the masses of people are kind of alienated from the process. And then on top of this, getting back to the latest update, people participate in these elections. As you said, it was a historic abstention rate. And even those who did participate, many of them cast blank ballots or no votes. Again, giving another vote of unconfidence to really this whole process. But of course, legitimizing it in some way. And in this process, now it's saying, okay, and the party that many people voted for is now not even legalized. So in this context, it's just people have responded by taking to the streets. They've been calling for defending democracy, respecting their vote. But it is, as we're saying, a much larger problem. And if it continues in this direction, if Bernardo Arevalo, if the attacks against him and his party continue, it will remain to be seen how the people respond, and really what is left of the democratic process in this country.
So I would imagine, Zoe, that the U.S. State Department is like all over this. They're super upset about, this attack on democracy and are going to intervene any moment now to make sure. Are we okay? Never mind. I take it back. But no, I'm curious, where does the U.S. fit into this? Because obviously nothing in Latin America really happens without some statement or some sort of involvement of U.S. something.
Well, there actually has been, following the election results and following these, essentially the several ruling parties, the reason why the results were suspended, it's sort of hard to synthesize all of the developments that have taken place in 1 month because it's a lot. But some of the other right-wing parties that did not make it to the second round elections lodged a complaint and saying that electoral fraud was committed and that the release of the official results had to be halted and there had to be a recount. Already in this moment, this had awoken kind of the suspicions of people within Guatemala, and international institutions and international human rights organizations, as well as many different embassies, had already started to make statements and started to condemn this maneuvering. And surprisingly so, the U.S. Embassy, in this sense, had also released a statement expressing concern over what was happening. I think it's just a very clear violation, and it's a very clear attempt by this ruling class to kind of use every tool at their disposal to try to reverse these results. And it's so blatant that not even the embassies, not even the global north is really is able to kind of condone it in a sense. So I think what will really be showing is and telling of what happens is what happens in the second round of these elections, which candidate is able to run. I mean, right now it's kind of this interinstitutional battle within Guatemala where you have one court saying that this party did illegal registrations. And then you have the other court, the electoral court, saying that this is the party that's going to the second round elections. So I think what is key to keep in mind is that the whole institutional breakdown in the country, the fact that this ruling class has been so emboldened and so empowered is, of course, a direct result of US policies in the region. I mean, there's a reason why they got so comfortable robbing from the state funds, from the budget. There's a reason why they're so comfortable being such a small minority in a country that's largely indigenous, and that you have a small white minority that's in power. I mean, this was permitted, of course, by US policies in Guatemala. The US backed dirty war. I mean, Guatemala was one of the first places which had a CIA-backed coup against Jacobo Arbenz in the 50s. So in this current moment, they're also expressing concern, but that's because they can. They've already created a situation where there's hardly a sense of institutional sovereignty, where the people have really no choice. Even when their candidates are disqualified, they have to participate in this process. And even then, when they participate in the electoral process, their small expression of who they want to win is being disqualified. So I think that larger context is helpful. Of course, Guatemala is also a country that has extremely flexible labor laws, where a lot of their agricultural production, of course, is where people are not able to survive through their agricultural production despite being an agricultural country, where there's heavy exploitation of workers permitted, again, by US policy. So I think in the holistic sense, of course, yes, this institutional breakdown, this situation of corruption is something that is a long process and has been debilitated by the general US policy towards the country. I mean, after all those years of intervening through a coup, through the dirty war, you have got Kamala Harris going to Guatemala and saying, tell your citizens, don't come to our country. This arrogance of the United States to come into a country, destroy it, break it down, exploit its labor, and then tell the people of that country, you have no right to immigrate. You have no right to try to look for better socioeconomic conditions.
And as you speak about that legacy of US empire and all the history that is still very vivid to these populations because they're still dealing with the impacts, the rippling effects of it, we have, and there's been plenty said about it, but I'm going to connect it to something of recent. We have that this man, this ghoul, Elliott Abrams, is getting a job in the Biden White House or in the Biden administration. Elliott Abrams being part of that Central American history of orchestrating dirty wars, as they've been described euphemistically. And I have to imagine that if you are a resident or a citizen of any Latin American country that is trying to become independent and not have to deal with the meddling of the U.S., this sends a message to you that you're still really up against quite a struggle, because this person, while it's not really that much of a visible organization, it's called the Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy. And historically, I was looking into this because I was curious what this was. I didn't know what this organization was within. It's part of the State Department, I think. And basically, the job of Elliott Abrams now is to be a propagandist for the U.S., to go out and proselytize and say what the U.S. agenda is globally and to basically force it upon different countries. That's what this commission does. And then meanwhile, a good friend of the show is pointed out that the U.S. still legally owes Nicaragua reparations, but still refuses to honor the 1986 International Court of Justice ruling that was related to the war against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. This comes from Ben Norton over at the Geopolitical Economy report, and people can go see a full breakdown. But I just want to take a moment as you raise this legacy of the US empire in Central America to ask you about this, to maybe get any comments, to talk about how we're still seeing these actors surface in the U.S. government and who still have blood on their hands and haven't reckoned or been forced to pay reparations to a country like Nicaragua.
Definitely. And I mean, I think these sort of maneuverings, I mean, Elliott Abrams supported and defended Efrain Rios Montt, whose daughter actually ran in these past elections. Rios Montt was one of the worst and most bloody dictators in Guatemala. He served in as a dictator during the Dirty War, was responsible for the genocide of over 100,000 Mayan indigenous people in the country. And now we see, of course, his daughter trying to participate and win leadership of the country. But I think these figureheads in U.S. politics are sort of business as usual, as we know, and both of you report on extensively. There is bipartisan consensus in many senses around U.S. foreign policy. There's no real difference between Democrats and Republicans on whether the genocidal sanctions regime against Cuba should continue. It's a Democrat who's actually promoting these sanctions. It's a Democrat who's defending the fact that Cuba is included on the state sponsor of terrorism list. So I don't think that people really have any high expectations for these war criminals to be met with any sort of justice in the traditional sense, in the sense of the U.S. establishment actually cracking down on its own. I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon. I mean, you have John Bolton write in his book that all options were on the table regarding Venezuela. You have Donald Trump saying that they essentially were about to have the possibility to steal Venezuela's oil, and he is going to be a major presidential candidate. So, I mean, people have no illusions about the interests of the U.S. ruling class, the lengths that they will go to achieve exactly what they want. But I think that actually these figureheads give a certain sort of clarity, because in today's day and age, it's a lot more subtle sometimes. It can be dressed up as, oh, well, actually, we're defending democracy. And of course, this has been the same discourse of the U.S., but they've actually just gotten a little better at doing it, at kind of creating this facade. And so I think that we are seeing a lot of the same policies. We're seeing more complications, I think, especially with the new regional configuration. We're not seeing the exact same formulas being implemented, but Cuba is a perfect example. It's been a revolution since the 1959, and the U.S. has maintained the same policy and increased and intensified it. So U.S. imperialism is not shying away from these sort of deadly and murderous policies. It's getting better at them. It can use unilateral coercive measures as a way to say, well, we're not putting boots on the ground, but we will strangulate an entire population and impose collective punishment on these people. And figures like Bob Menendez, it doesn't seem like he's going to be seeing any sort of justice for what he's committed against the people of Cuba, against what he's committed against the people of Venezuela, against the people of Nicaragua. So the fact that these people continue to circulate, continue to get these positions is really no surprise. I mean, this is the nature of the U.S. Foreign policy area. I mean, they just circulate from the press secretary to the State Department to whatever position they'll have. I mean, they're all sort of united. So there's no real surprise there, I think.
You know, you were telling me before when we were talking, Zoe, about the fact that you are actually headed to a very important summit in Brussels. Why don't you tell us, a CELAC summit? Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? First, for those who aren't familiar, or maybe have heard of CELAC but don't exactly know what's going on there. What's CELAC? Why is it significant? And what do you expect to happen at the summit? Is there anything new taking place?
Yes, well, hitting the road again this afternoon, or days ago for people who are listening to this later. um, this 17th and 18th of July, there's going to be um, the summit of heads of state summit between leaders of the community of Latin American and Caribbean states and the European Union. This is a historic summit because it is the first time that it's taking place in 8 years. There was an 8-year hiatus of this meeting. CELAC is today the most important platform for regional integration in Latin America and the Caribbean. It was formed in 2011 during the progressive wave of governments, during the moment where Fidel and Hugo Chavez were really trying to figure out how to create spaces of regional integration that are not dominated by the US, that are not essentially created with this false idea that it will be integration, but really what it is a space to impose US agenda, is to rally people around the US interests. Of course, I'm talking about the Organization of American States, OAS. This is not a platform of regional integration in earnest. It is a space where the US tells countries how they must think about Cuba, about Venezuela, about everything happening in the region, where it says, this is what you have to do, this is what we think about this, and this is how we're going to respond to this. That's not regional integration. That's just trying to impose a line and have people be subservient to your interests. So in this moment, when there were all these different progressive governments that were seriously invested in trade cooperation, in economic cooperation. This is a region that's extremely rich in natural resources, in water resources, in so many different things, but has been historically underdeveloped because of US imperialism. And so they were coming together and saying, we have all this potential, we have all this desire to move forward and to advance for our people. How do we do that together? How do we understand that Brazil has the Amazon, Colombia has one of the largest, Colombia and Venezuela have massive oil resources. How to figure out how everyone can advance together, develop new technology, to develop new forms of cooperation. And in this moment, that's how CELAC is created. And it's not just South America, it's also the Caribbean, understanding that the Caribbean is a fundamental part of the region. It's an area that has also a lot of importance in terms of its people, its history, its resources, but also an area that needs, that really desperately needs this trade and cooperation because, of course, being small islands, it's impossible for them to be, completely sovereign in terms of food production, in terms of all of the necessities that these countries need. And that because of colonialism, they've been so dependent and so super exploited by the global north. And of course, it's the region that is continuing to be dominated by colonial powers, where there are islands that are continued to be owned by France, by the United States, by the UK. So that's essentially CELAC in a nutshell. It went through a difficult period where right-wing governments were in control in the region. People were gravitating more towards the OAS. The Lima Group was founded in this moment with the specific objective of overthrowing the government of Nicolás Maduro. But in recent years, and especially with the victory of Andrés Manuel López Obrador in Mexico, CELAC has once again gained the importance and gained the centrality that it once had. And for the past several years, it has become this space where all of the countries, irrespective of political ideology, irrespective of political position, have come to the table and have actually made concrete advancements, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, where Latin America and the Caribbean were one of the worst impacted regions, of course, being one of the most unequal regions. This, of course, means that the masses of people in many countries were suffering. Peru, for example, had one of the highest death rates in the world in terms of COVID-19 deaths. And so CELAC, once again, with Andrés Manuel, with this new progressive tide, has become this space where Latin American and Caribbean leaders are coming together and building consensus on key issues. And so they're coming to the table with the European Union, which is, of course, is the bloc of European countries in this historic summit to discuss bi-regional issues, to discuss bi-regional cooperation. Of course, it's important to say that the relationship between Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean has been one of domination. It has been one where Europe was, for hundreds of years, colonizing these countries, exploiting their resources, committing genocide against the native people. And in some respects, and this continues, as I said today, in the Caribbean, where these European countries continue to have control and continue to essentially have these colonies. So now, this next week, they're coming together in Brussels to debate this bi-regional agenda. However, once again, we're seeing a sort of attitude of superiority, of domination, of unilateralism from the European Union. They've made a series of sort of bad faith measures, bad faith moves. The European Parliament this week, 2 days ago, just approved a resolution condemning Cuba, singling out Cuba, saying that it was a flagrant violator of human rights, that Miguel Diaz-Canel should be sanctioned, and that this CELAC EU summit essentially should not be a space for authoritarian leaders to come, and that if it really wanted to defend democracy, then these people should not be allowed. So once again, despite being 2023 in Europe, really should sort of assume its place and also recognize and respect other regions, it continues to have this sort of colonial attitude. However, that being said, it still will be a very, very important summit. Miguel Diaz-Canel, Lula da Silva, many important heads of state are headed to Brussels, are headed to Europe currently, and it's going to be a pretty interesting couple of days there.
And before we have to wrap, I think it's important to raise, because so many people right now are acutely experiencing the impacts of the climate emergency that is global. So I'm interested in hearing about what the impacts in 2023, especially right now, what you might be observing, what you might be hearing from different groups that are grappling with material conditions that are not good for working class and indigenous populations, and low income people who have to fight for resources, and what their struggles are, and perhaps what this might mean for a CELAC EU summit, and what Caribbean and Latin American countries are hoping to achieve. There's a certain amount of solidarity, I'm aware, among some of the leaders of those countries to work together, but we all recognize that there are Western countries that are pursuing policies. There are larger regional powers that pursue policies that actually undermine the ability to curb some of the emissions and address some of the things that need to be dealt with in order to rein in the amount that humans are affecting this rapid change in the climate. But here in North America, we're seeing this record, like there's hundreds of wildfires, it would seem, in Canada, with smoke blanketing the US. And I know that in Brazil, it's been really important to try and recover and deal with the deforestation of the Amazon. So, what can you tell us about the importance of dealing with the climate emergency, and what kind of new developments you might be hearing about with the climate?
Well, the environmental crisis is one of the key issues on the agenda at this upcoming summit. And the leaders from Latin America and the Caribbean have been really on the forefront of constantly bringing up the environment and the need to protect the environment. This is, of course, because they're some of the most impacted. It's a country that has historically been looted, like much of the global south, for its resources, that suffers disproportionately from climate devastation, from all different sorts of this, whether it be in natural disasters, whether it be in deforestation and the destruction of different ecosystems and climates because of large-scale mining and other extractive processes. And so at many different international summits, meetings. It has been the leaders of the region, notably Colombian President Gustavo Petro, Brazilian President Lula da Silva, who have really been calling on the global north to fulfill its historic obligation and duty, being one of the largest contributors to, of course, climate change and climate devastation, calling on them to actually fulfill their commitment and their promise to climate financing. It has been the leaders of the Caribbean, along with the Small Islands Alliance, that has been calling, along with countries such as Pakistan and others, that have been calling the global north to actually provide this climate financing that would give these countries the means and the funds to really be able to respond to such devastation. These are countries that are also strapped with a very unjust and in many cases colonial debt. If we look at a country like Haiti, an island nation that has, since its independence, been repeatedly punished by colonial powers because of its desire to be free, because of its desire to build a new kind of nation. This is a country that greatly suffers from climate change and has one of the largest external debts that can trace back to the debt that France attempted to extract from Haiti because of its ending of slavery and because of its anti-colonial war for liberation. So these are countries across the region that have been joining with the rest of the global south to demand climate financing, to demand respect for their environment, to demand that actually these global north powers take it seriously and take seriously the impacts of climate change. Of course, there have been more and more impacts in countries as close as Canada, and Europe has also started to see the impacts of climate devastation. But again, this is largely and most felt by people in the global south and who are having to deal with the fact that capitalism continues to destroy the environment and continues to demand more and more exploitation of the Earth's resources. And so this is a very, very strong fight. And Europe, of course, has, in its typical way of trying to be the moral grandfather of the rest of the world, has taken a potentially better discursive line, should we say, on the environment. However, it's still European countries, European companies that continue to operate across the global south, that continue to disrespect environmental regulations, that continue to favor production and accumulation over respecting the earth. So, this is, I think they're constantly caught in this contradiction where they have they know what to say, they have the polite line, but they continue to join hands with the US in terms of their military budget, in terms of how much they're investing in amassing arms, et cetera, which are some of the most destructive activities against the environment. And so I think especially because we know Petro and Lula are going to be at the CELAC EU summit, the environment and this discussion of the responsibility of the global north in respecting the global south and in really following through on their obligation to climate financing will definitely be on the table. And we can expect that to be a very, very interesting conversation.
Wow. Zoe, I love hearing from you about all of this. I kind of want to really quickly get your take on something that happened a few weeks ago. Maybe it's a little bit of a dated topic, but since you're on and Latin America is sort of your realm of expertise, you may remember about a month ago, Trump said something quite interesting about Venezuela. He basically blatantly admitted that he wanted to steal their oil. And he was complaining that if he had, succeeded in continuing to be in charge of the US, he would have. I'm just curious, if that played out in the media, not just in Venezuela, but in the region, or, how that admission was seen. I know Maduro actually responded directly to it. But I also think it's interesting how, basically, no liberals said anything in response at all, which just shows that they believe in the same exact thing. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that. And then also how it was covered in the region.
I think for a lot of people, this, as I said, is kind of they know the real interest of the U.S. In all of these moments. It's clear why the U.S. is attacking Venezuela. It's, if anything, again, it provided this sort of moment of clarity and moment of see, maybe for those who are unconvinced. But I think it's logical. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the region, and so much energy and effort was dedicated to attacking Venezuela, to putting it, to starving it, to putting the worst sanctions against it. And so this was clear and I think, if anything, again, it was kind of this like validation for the Venezuelan people who've been suffering for so many years under this. But I think the point that liberals had essentially no reaction is really speaks to what I said before, in which you talk about a lot, Rania, which is that there is complete consensus between the Democrats and Republicans on many aspects of foreign policy. And with Venezuela, I mean, there's been horrific violations committed against the Venezuelan people, a regime of collective punishment that we can compare to what the collective punishment of the population in Gaza, the collective punishment faced by the people of Yemen were facing. I mean, these are the people of Iran, of Cuba. These sanctions, these unilateral coercive measures are an act of war. And that's why, especially the Venezuelan people, the Venezuelan government has said that they are at war. They're at war with the sanctions regime, with the United States. And there have even been acts of war. There was an attempt to invade Venezuela. This happened during the pandemic. Probably people remember it, where American mercenaries from Florida attempted to invade Venezuela on a speedboat, and they were defeated by the organized people in La Guaira, these fishermen. I mean, a beautiful sight to see. But all that to be said is that it is, oftentimes people say, oh, the policy, the U.S. policy towards these places, maybe it's not great, but it's more than these are more than policies. And I think that people get lost in the details and see this as just a position or just some words on a paper, just these bills. But it is an act of war, and sanctions are an act of war. Sanctions are an attempt to starve a population. They're an attempt to cause internal revolt. I mean, the U.S. often accuses Venezuela of, oh, look at this small group of power and see how they're controlling the country. But it's also the fact that they're in a war and they're trying to respond to an act of war. And so how, it affects so many levels of society. It affects the ability of the country to import food, medicine. It affects their ability to engage in financial transactions. It affects just really everything. And so I think that this was received as kind of a breath of fresh air, but also just such, it's just so indignant, and it's so brazen of the U.S. establishment to really make these statements. But again, it is nothing new. This year is 200 years of the Monroe Doctrine, which for many people across Latin America and the Caribbean is really this document that demarcates the U.S. position and attitude towards the region. The fact that Latin America is our backyard, nobody else can get in there, that independence, sovereignty, and freedom of this region is not allowed as long as the U.S. is going to have control over that. So I think in this 200-year anniversary, people are saying the U.S. continues to try to carry out the Monroe Doctrine. It continues to try to dominate the region. But when we see spaces like CELAC, when we see statements from leaders such as Andrés Manuel López Obrador to say we're not going to participate in the last year's Summit of the Americas, that we're not going to cave to U.S. pressures like we did before, I think it definitely shows a shift in the tide. The U.S. is desperately trying to hang on. They're desperately trying to retain control of the region, all of the resources that it has to offer, that it wants to use for the betterment of its own people. And so it continues to have this kind of push and pull over the region, but we can see that the organized people have had enough of this, and they want their riches for their own betterment. They want to advance, they want to develop, they want to have a sovereign region.
So, that's very well put. And I can't get past the fact that I've just realized that Henry Kissinger has been alive for half of the Monroe Doctrine's existence, that big, giant, rotten ball of flesh that won't leave our planet. So thank you, Zoe, for being here. And why don't you tell everyone where they can find your work and catch up on all of the important solidarity, support that you're giving to these movements and coverage of what's going on in the world?
Well, everyone can check out peoplesdispatch.org, at People's Dispatch on all different social media platforms. We don't just cover Latin America, but people's movements across the world, from Tunisia to India to Zimbabwe, South Africa. We're committed to telling the stories of people in struggle, the stories of people fighting for a world without U.S. imperialism, for a world where they have determination over their own destinies, and a world with human dignity. So please check out peoplesdispatch.org, at People's Dispatch on social media.
All right. Thank you, everyone.